Welcome to All For You Stories, where we want you to think different so you'll act different. Let's go. Someone with no one. Chapter 2. Twice too many. I only remember going to church 2 times in my life. I know there's been more because there used to be a picture in the living room with my mother, father, and me in front of a church. I wore a suit small enough to put on a doll, and my mother stood to my right wearing a black hat, which appeared to be bigger than me, while my father stood on the other side like he would rather have been somewhere else. I don't remember anything about being there, but the picture lets me know that church and I were not complete strangers. The first time I actually remember going happened a couple of years ago, after my parents got into one of their biggest fights ever. My father had been drinking before he left to go out with some of his friends, and my mother hid his keys to stop him from leaving. He had searched the entire house for almost 20 minutes before it occurred to him my mother might have hid them. The alcohol made it difficult for him to put his words together, but he ultimately got around to asking her. She denied it with such a straight face, I believed her, even though I saw her put them in the Santa Claus cookie jar we kept on the counter. My father's voice got louder, and he started to throw things. A chair flipped over, several dishes broke, and rumbling made me think of an earthquake. I knew screams would soon follow, and I buried my head beneath my pillow. My mother yelped so loudly I came out of my room to help. I saw her face being smothered against the door by my father's shoulder. Blood streamed out of her nose and smeared on the door like a crayon melting in the sun. I yelled for him to stop, but as usual, he didn't hear me. My mother twisted her head from beneath his shoulder, opened her mouth, and sunk her teeth into his flesh. He screamed and backed up to escape her bite. She refused to let go and moved with him while trying to separate the meat from the bone. My voice went silent as the two of them fell to the floor. He tried to use his 100-pound advantage to control her, but she wasn't having it. She bit, kicked, scratched, swung, and anything else she could to fight back. He tried to quit a couple of times, but she wouldn't let him and would chase him down and attack him again like a wild animal. By the time they finished, his ripped clothes, cut skin, and swollen lip made him seem more like the victim. I cried the whole time, even though no one paid attention to me. I thought I didn't matter to anyone until my mother repeated what she had been saying for as long as I could remember. I'm sick of this, and I'm not putting up with it anymore. She yanked me into the room and threw clothes into a suitcase. She cursed more than I had ever heard in my entire life, and I thought we would really leave this time. But the thought vanished when my father stood in the doorway with his head down. The alcohol went wherever alcohol goes after it's done, and a completely different person emerged. He dabbed at his lips to get rid of the blood and played with his ripped shirt while she pretended not to see him. I'm sorry, he called softly. My mother finished packing the suitcase, but we never left. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, the two of them sat at the table eating grits and talking like the night before had never happened. He apologized repeatedly, promising that it would never happen again. He also vowed to start going to church with her. This pleased her enough to give him another couple of spoonfuls of grits, and within the week, we all sat in the back pew of her Baptist church on Main Street. The thundering sound of the drums and organ made me want to cover my ears the moment we stepped in. Most of the people sang, but I couldn't understand them. The women wore big hats, and many of the men wore suits, even though my father had on the same shirt and jeans he wore the day before. I listened to the preacher, a fat man who sweated enough to make me wonder how he could be so fat, using words I didn't understand. I could not help but wonder why we were there. My father had already started drinking again, and him attending church would probably last half as long as his sobriety. When church ended, I stood by my mother, and she said her goodbyes to women with bigger hats than hers. I began to understand why she went to church all the time. Everyone showed her so much love and seemed so happy to see us, it made me feel good too. I smiled whenever someone hugged me, until a lady big enough to swallow me in one bite kissed me on the mouth. Yuck. I didn't go back to church for about 3 months, and when I walked in, it felt completely different. Big hats still floated on top of most of the women's heads, but the music sounded solemn and mellow. Instead of sitting near the back, We sat in the front pew where a few of the ladies I recognized from before again came to hug and kiss me. The same fat preacher spoke, but his voice didn't ricochet off the walls like before. He spoke and people cried while I sat there, dreading the moment they opened the casket and I would have to see my mother's lifeless body. This is all I ever knew about church, and is all I needed to know. Shantel may think it is something she needs to learn about, but I already know it only leads to pain and disappointment. I wanted to explain this to her when we walked home, but the time didn't feel right. She faked a smile and whispered goodbye before she went in the house, and I knew things would not be the same unless I did something to change her mind. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, tell somebody else about us, and do what needs to get done. Peace.